The gunshot that shattered the morning stillness wasn't meant for Jessamine Farrow, but it changed her life forever anyway. She'd been standing outside the Silver Dollar Saloon in Goldfield, Nevada, clutching her worn carpetbag and wondering if answering an advertisement for a bookkeeper was the stupidest decision she'd ever made. The year was 1876, and at 22 years old, Jessamine had precious few options left. Her father's debts had swallowed their Boston home whole, and her mother's passing the previous winter had severed the last thread tying her to respectability in Massachusetts. When she'd seen the advertisement seeking someone with mathematical skills and neat penmanship, she'd spent her last dollars on a train ticket west. The bullet hit the post beside her head, sending splinters flying. Jessamine dropped her bag and pressed herself against the saloon's weathered wood, heart hammering against her ribs. Two men on horseback were firing at a third man who'd taken cover behind a water trough across the dusty street. The morning sun blazed overhead, turning everything into sharp contrasts of light and shadow. "Get inside," a voice commanded from somewhere to her left. Before she could process the words, strong hands gripped her shoulders and pulled her through the saloon doors. She stumbled over the threshold, and the doors swung shut behind her with a decisive thud. Jessamine spun around to face her rescuer, ready to offer thanks, and found herself looking up into the most striking pair of blue eyes she'd ever seen. They were the color of a winter sky just before snow, set in a sun-weathered face that belonged to a man somewhere in his late 20s. He was tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his work shirt, and there was dust on his boots and the faint smell of leather and horses about him. "You all right, miss?" he asked, and his voice had a quality that made her think of whiskey and smoke. Yes, thank you," Jessamine managed, smoothing down her travel-worn skirts. "I didn't expect such a welcoming committee." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "That's Goldfield for you." Mining town tensions run hot, especially when someone thinks someone else jumped their claim. He extended his hand. "Owen O'Sullivan. I run a ranch about 10 miles north of here." She placed her hand in his, noting the calluses and the strength in his grip. "Jessamine Farrow, from Boston." "Long way from home." His eyes held hers for a moment longer than strictly necessary, and Jessamine felt something shift in her chest, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. "I'm here about a job," she said, pulling her hand back. "The saloon owner advertised for a bookkeeper." Owen's expression changed, became more guarded. "That would be Marcus Webb. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "He's a businessman, Miss Farrow, the kind who sees opportunities where others see obstacles. Meaning he's unscrupulous, meaning you should be careful." The shooting outside had stopped, replaced by shouting voices. Owen moved to the window, peering through the dusty glass. Jessamine took the opportunity to study him more closely. There was something about the way he carried himself, a quiet confidence that suggested he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. His dark hair curled slightly at his collar, and when he turned back to her, she noticed the small scar above his left eyebrow. "Looks like the sheriff's got it handled," Owen said. "I should get your bag from outside." "You don't have to do that. Wouldn't be right to leave it in the street." He was already moving toward the door, and Jessamine found herself following. Something about this man made her want to stay in his orbit, though she couldn't have explained why if pressed. They stepped back into the bright morning, and Owen retrieved her carpetbag from where she dropped it. The street was quieter now, though a small crowd had gathered around the sheriff and his prisoners. Owen handed her the bag and their fingers brushed. "Miss Farrow." A new voice interrupted the moment. Jessamine turned to see a portly man in an expensive suit descending the saloon's exterior stairs. His hair was slicked back with pomade, and there was a gold watch chain glinting across his vest. "I'm Marcus Webb. You must be the young lady who wrote about the bookkeeping position." "Yes, Mr. Webb. I apologize for arriving in the middle of such excitement." Webb waved a dismissive hand. "Part of life here in Nevada. Mining brings money, and money brings trouble." His eyes flicked to Owen, and something cold passed through them. "Mr. O'Sullivan. Didn't expect to see you in town this early." "Just picking up supplies," Owen replied. His tone neutral, but his posture subtly changed, became more alert. "Well, don't let me keep you." Webb turned his attention back to Jessamine, his smile revealing yellowed teeth. "Shall we discuss your employment, Miss Farrow? I have an office upstairs." Jessamine hesitated, glancing at Owen. He gave a small shake of his head, so slight she almost missed it. But Webb had already taken her elbow, guiding her toward the stairs. "I'll be in town until noon," Owen said, his eyes holding Jessamine's. "At the general store if you need anything." She understood the unspoken message. If things went wrong, she could find him. The knowledge settled something anxious in her chest, even as Webb led her up the stairs and away from the blue-eyed rancher who'd looked at her like she mattered, like she was someone worth protecting. Webb's office was surprisingly neat, with a large desk covered in ledgers and papers. A safe squatted in the corner like a steel toad. He gestured to a chair across from his desk, and Jessamine sat, arranging her skirts and trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. "Your letter mentioned you worked for an importing firm in Boston," Webb began, settling into his own chair with a creak of leather. "Yes, for 3 years. I managed their accounts receivable and payable, tracked inventory, and prepared financial reports." Jessamine folded her hands in her lap. "I have references, though they may take some time to arrive by post." "I'm sure that won't be necessary. Frankly, Miss Farrow, I'm impressed you made the journey out here at all. Most women wouldn't have the courage." He leaned forward. "The position pays $40 a month plus room and board. You'd have a room here above the saloon, 3 meals a day, and your duties would include maintaining my business ledgers, managing payroll for my employees, and handling correspondence." It was more money than she'd made in Boston, and the offer of room and board meant she wouldn't have to find separate lodging. But something about Webb made her skin crawl, an instinctive wariness she couldn't quite name. "That sounds fair," Jessamine said carefully. "What exactly are your business interests, Mr. Webb?" "The saloon, primarily, but I also have stakes in several mining operations, a freight company, and some property around town." He pulled out a ledger and opened it, turning it toward her. "As you can see, there are quite a few accounts to manage." Jessamine scanned the columns of figures. The penmanship was atrocious, numbers crammed together and difficult to read, but the mathematics appeared straightforward enough. "When would you like me to start?" "Today, if you're amenable. I'll have one of my girls show you to your room, give you time to settle in, and then you can begin familiarizing yourself with the accounts this afternoon." "One of your girls," the women who work downstairs, serving drinks, entertaining customers. Webb's smile took on a knowing quality. "Don't worry, Miss Farrow. You're hired as a bookkeeper, nothing more. Your reputation will remain intact." The way he said it made her doubt that very thing, but Jessamine had little choice. She needed this job, needed the money and the stability it offered. "Then yes, I accept." They shook hands, and Webb called out toward the door. A young woman appeared moments later, blonde and pretty, with tired eyes that had seen too much too soon. She couldn't have been more than 19. "Lily, this is Miss Farrow. She's going to be keeping my books. Show her to the spare room on the 3rd floor and help her get settled." "Yes, Mr. Webb." Lily's voice was soft, barely above a whisper. She gestured to Jessamine. "This way, miss." Jessamine followed Lily up another flight of stairs to a narrow hallway with several doors. The sounds of the saloon drifted up from below, even at this early hour. Piano music, male laughter, the clink of bottles and glasses. "This one's yours," Lily said, opening a door at the end of the hall. The room was small but clean, with a bed, a washstand, a wardrobe, and a small desk beneath the window. The window itself looked out over Goldfield's Main Street, giving a view of the general store directly across. "It's perfect, thank you," Jessamine said, setting down her carpetbag. Lily lingered in the doorway, worrying her lower lip. "Miss, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why'd you come here? A respectable lady like you could find work lots of places." Jessamine sat on the bed, suddenly exhausted from the journey and the morning's excitement. "I didn't have as many choices as you might think. My family. Well, there's nothing left back in Boston for me. I needed a fresh start. Be careful of Mr. Webb." Lily's voice dropped even lower. "He seems nice enough at first, but he's got a mean streak. And he doesn't like people crossing him or asking too many questions." "I'll remember that." Lily nodded and left, closing the door softly behind her. Jessamine sat in the quiet room, wondering what exactly she'd gotten herself into. Through the window, she could see people moving along the street below. Her eyes tracked toward the general store, and she wondered if Owen O'Sullivan was still there, if he really would wait until noon as he'd said. She stood and moved to the window, pressing her palm against the warm glass. In Boston, she'd been invisible, just another spinster daughter caring for an ailing parent, drowning in debt and diminishing prospects. Here in Nevada, she was something different. What exactly, she wasn't yet sure. After washing her face and changing into a fresh shirtwaist, Jessamine unpinned her dark hair, brushed it out and repinned it in a neat bun. She studied her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. Her face was too thin, made gaunt by the hard winter and the lean spring that followed. Her eyes were her best feature, large and hazel, framed by dark lashes. Not beautiful, perhaps, but not plain either. Somewhere in between, where most people lived their lives. She descended the stairs back to Webb's office, where he set her up at a smaller desk in the corner with a stack of ledgers and correspondence. The work itself was familiar, comforting even. Numbers had always made sense to Jessamine in a way that people often didn't. They followed rules, behaved predictably, added up to logical conclusions. Webb's accounts were a mess, but not so much that she couldn't begin sorting them out. She worked steadily through the morning, barely noticing when Webb left the office for stretches of time. The saloon grew noisier as noon approached, the sounds filtering up through the floorboards. Around 12:30, there was a knock on the office door. Jessamine looked up from her work to see Owen O'Sullivan standing in the doorway, hat in hand. "Mr. O'Sullivan," she said, surprised at how glad she was to see him. "Miss Farrow, I wanted to check that you were all right before I headed back to the ranch." "I'm fine, thank you. Mr. Webb has been perfectly professional." She set down her pen, noting how Owen's gaze took in the office, the ledgers, her position at the desk. Something in his expression eased slightly. "Good. That's good." He shifted his weight, and Jessamine realized he was nervous. This confident, self-assured rancher was nervous around her, and the knowledge sent a warm flutter through her chest. "I was wondering if you might like to join me for lunch before I go. There's a decent restaurant down the street, serves better food than the saloon. I don't know if I should leave on my first day. Webb won't mind. Everyone takes a lunch break." Owen's blue eyes held hers, and there was something in them that made it impossible to refuse. Not pleading exactly, but a kind of hopeful intensity that suggested her answer mattered to him more than it should. Jessamine found herself nodding. "Let me just finish this entry," She completed the line of figures, closed the ledger, and stood. Owen waited while she collected her shawl, then offered his arm as they descended the stairs. The gesture was old-fashioned, courtly, and it made Jessamine feel like something precious being escorted through the rough saloon. The restaurant was called Maggie's Place, a small establishment with checkered tablecloths and the smell of fresh bread. An older woman with gray hair and a kind face greeted Owen by name. "2 for lunch, Maggie," Owen said, "and whatever you recommend today." They settled at a table by the window, and Maggie brought them coffee without asking. Jessamine wrapped her hands around the warm cup, suddenly uncertain. She'd never lunched alone with a man who wasn't family, never sat across a table from someone who looked at her the way Owen did, like he was trying to memorize her face. "How long have you had your ranch?" she asked, seeking safe conversational ground. 5 years. I bought the land from a prospector who decided he was done with Nevada and wanted to go back east. Owen cradled his own coffee cup, his large hands dwarfing the china. "It's not much yet, just cattle and horses, but it's mine. Built the house myself, hired a few good men to help with the work. It must be satisfying, building something from nothing." "It is, though it can be lonely sometimes." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Maggie returned with plates of stew and thick slices of bread, and they ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. The food was delicious, rich and warming, and Jessamine realized she hadn't eaten since the previous evening on the train. "Can I ask you something?" Owen said finally. "Of course. Why'd you really come to Goldfield?" "A woman with your education could find work in San Francisco or Sacramento, somewhere more civilized." Jessamine set down her spoon, considering how much to reveal. There was something about Owen that invited honesty, a steadiness that suggested he could be trusted. "My father died 2 years ago, deep in debt. He'd been gambling, making bad investments, trying to recoup losses with worse decisions. My mother and I lost everything. She got sick last winter, and after she passed, there was nothing keeping me in Boston except memories I'd rather forget. I saw Mr. Webb's advertisement and thought it was a sign. I'm sorry. About your parents." Owen's voice was gentle. "And I'm sorry if I seemed harsh about Webb earlier. He's not a bad man exactly, just someone who values profit over people. I wanted to make sure you knew what you were walking into. I appreciate the warning, and I appreciate this." She gestured to the meal, the restaurant. "You didn't have to check on me. I wanted to." The simple statement carried weight. Owen leaned forward slightly. "Miss Farrow, I'm not good at pretty words or playing games, so I'll just be straight with you. When I pulled you into that saloon this morning and you looked up at me, something happened. I can't explain it, and I don't fully understand it, but I felt like I'd been waiting for you without knowing I was waiting." Jessamine's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such raw honesty. "I felt it too," she admitted quietly. "Like recognition, almost. I want to see you again. Court you proper if you'll allow it. I'd like that." The words were out before she could second-guess them, before practicality and caution could convince her to refuse. But sitting across from Owen, seeing the way his face lit up at her acceptance, she knew it was the right answer. They finished their meal, and Owen insisted on paying despite Jessamine's protests. As they walked back toward the silver dollar, Owen slowed his pace, clearly reluctant for the afternoon to end. "I come into town for supplies every Tuesday and Thursday," he said. "Could I call on you then? Maybe we could have dinner or just take a walk if you prefer." "That sounds wonderful." Jessamine found herself smiling, really smiling for the first time in months. They stopped outside the saloon, and Owen took her hand, holding it gently. "Until Tuesday, then. Until Tuesday." He mounted his horse, a magnificent chestnut gelding, and tipped his hat to her before riding north out of town. Jessamine watched him go, her hand still warm from his touch, her heart doing strange acrobatics in her chest. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Jessamine worked diligently on Webb's accounts, untangling years of poor record-keeping and creating organized systems. Webb seemed pleased with her work, leaving her largely alone to manage his affairs. She took her meals in her room or at Maggie's, avoiding the saloon proper and the occasional roughness that erupted there. Lily and some of the other girls would sometimes visit her room in the evenings, seeking company that didn't involve drunken minors or cowboys. Jessamine found herself becoming friends with these women whose society would dismiss as fallen. They were funny and kind and tired, trying to survive in a world that gave them few choices. Tuesday arrived with Jessamine's stomach full of nervous butterflies. She'd agonized over what to wear, finally settling on her best dress, a deep green cotton with a modest neckline and fitted bodice. She'd never cared much about her appearance before, but now she found herself checking her reflection repeatedly, smoothing her hair, pinching her cheeks for color. Owen arrived at 6, cleaned up and wearing what was clearly his best shirt. His eyes widened when he saw her. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and the way he said it made Jessamine believe him. He took her to Maggie's again, and they talked for hours. Owen told her about his childhood in Wyoming, how he'd worked as a ranch hand and saved every penny until he could buy his own land. He spoke about his parents, both deceased, and his younger sister who'd married a shopkeeper in Denver. He described his ranch with such love that Jessamine could picture it perfectly. The rolling hills and the cattle dotting the landscape, the house he'd built with his own hands. In turn, Jessamine told him about Boston, about growing up as an only child, about her love of mathematics and books. She confessed her fears about her father's gambling, the slow realization that the comfortable life she'd known was built on sand. She even told him about the proposal she'd received from a much older merchant friend of her father's, how she'd refused despite her mother's urging because the man had looked at her like property to be acquired. "I'm glad you refused," Owen said quietly. "Though I suppose I'm selfish for being glad." "Why selfish?" "Because if you'd married him, you wouldn't be here now. I wouldn't have met you." The tenderness in his voice made Jessamine's throat tight. They lingered over coffee until Maggie started pointedly stacking chairs, a gentle hint that it was closing time. Owen walked her back to the saloon, and at the door he took both her hands in his. "Thursday?" he asked. "Thursday," she confirmed. He lifted one of her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth radiating up her arm. Then he was gone, striding into the night, and Jessamine floated up the stairs to her room like she weighed nothing at all. Thursday came, and they walked together through Goldfield as the sun set, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and pink. Owen pointed out constellations as the stars emerged, and Jessamine found herself standing closer to him than strictly proper, drawn by the warmth of his presence and the steady calm he radiated. The following Tuesday, Owen arrived with a proposal. "I want to show you the ranch. Would you come for a day? I'll have you back by evening, I promise." Jessamine knew she should refuse. Visiting a man's home unchaperoned was scandalous, could ruin her reputation if anyone found out. But she'd never cared much about reputation, and she desperately wanted to see the place Owen described with such affection. "I'd love to," she said. They left early Sunday morning when the town was quiet and few people were around to see them go. Owen helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her, one arm around her waist to keep her steady. The contact was intimate, thrilling, and entirely improper. Jessamine decided she didn't care. The ride took them through desert landscape that was harsh but beautiful, dotted with sagebrush and occasional Joshua trees. Owen pointed out landmarks, telling her stories about the area, and Jessamine relaxed against him, feeling safer than she had in years. The O'Sullivan ranch appeared as they crested a low hill. It was exactly as Owen had described: a sturdy wooden house with a wide porch, a barn and several outbuildings, corrals holding cattle and horses. The property sat in a valley with a small creek running through it, creating a ribbon of green in the brown landscape. "It's wonderful," Jessamine breathed, and felt Owen's chest expand with pride behind her. He helped her down and led her on a tour, showing her the barn where 3 ranch hands were mending tack, the chicken coop, the garden plot that was currently lying fallow. The house was simple but well built, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, 2 bedrooms and a loft space overhead. "I built it bigger than I needed," Owen admitted, showing her around the main room. "Thinking ahead, I suppose, hoping for a family someday." Jessamine ran her hand over the sturdy table, the chairs Owen had clearly made himself. Everything was practical, solid, built to last. Like Owen himself. They sat on the porch and shared the lunch Owen had packed, and Jessamine felt something settle in her soul. This place, this man, felt like home in a way Boston never had. She could imagine herself here, could picture waking up to watch the sunrise over the hills, spending evenings on this porch, building a life alongside Owen. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked softly. "That I never expected to find this. Find you." She turned to look at him, finding his blue eyes already on her. "I came to Nevada thinking I was running away from my old life, but maybe I was running toward this instead." Owen reached over and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Jessamine, I know we've only known each other a few weeks, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I'm falling in love with you. I think I started falling the moment I saw you outside that saloon." "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered, and it was the truest thing she'd ever said. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, but Jessamine met him halfway. Their lips touched softly, tentatively, then with growing certainty. Owen cradled her face in his hands like she was something infinitely precious, and Jessamine felt herself dissolving into the kiss, into him, into the promise of what they could be together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it's fast, I know I should court you properly for months and do everything right, but I can't stand the thought of you living above that saloon, of not being able to protect you. Marry me, Jessamine, be my wife." Every sensible bone in her body screamed that this was madness. They'd known each other less than a month, but her heart knew better, recognized the rightness of this moment, of this man. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." Owen kissed her again, deeper this time, and Jessamine wrapped her arms around his neck, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning world. When they finally separated, he was grinning like a boy given an unexpected present. "We can get married in town," Owen said, already planning. "The circuit judge comes through next Saturday. We'll need a license, witnesses. You'll move out here after, leave that saloon behind for good." Reality intruded on Jessamine's happiness. "Owen, I have to give Mr. Webb notice. I can't just abandon my position." "Why not?" "You don't owe him anything." "I owe him honesty and professional courtesy. He hired me when I needed work, paid me fairly. I should at least give him 2 weeks' notice, time to find a replacement." Owen's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "You're right. You're a better person than I am. But I don't like the idea of you there any longer than necessary." 2 weeks, Jessamine promised. "Then I'm yours completely." They spent the rest of the afternoon at the ranch, and Owen introduced her to his men. Charlie, the foreman, was a grizzled man in his 50s who looked at Jessamine with approval. The other two hands, Tom and Miguel, were younger, both friendly and respectful. By the time Owen took her back to town, the sun was setting, and Jessamine's cheeks hurt from smiling. Monday morning she asked to speak with Marcus Webb privately. He settled behind his desk, looking curious. "I'm giving you my 2 weeks' notice," Jessamine said without preamble. "I'm getting married." Webb's expression went through several shifts: surprise, anger, calculation. "Married to whom?" "Owen O'Sullivan, the rancher." Webb's voice was flat. "That's awfully fast, Miss Farrow. Nevertheless, it's happening. I wanted to give you time to find a replacement. I'll train whoever you hire, make sure the transition is smooth." Webb leaned back in his chair, studying her with cold eyes. "And if I don't accept your notice, if I insist you fulfill the 6-month contract you signed?" Jessamine felt her stomach drop. "What contract? I never signed any contract. You signed the employment agreement." Webb pulled out a piece of paper and slid it across the desk. Jessamine scanned it, her blood running cold. Buried in the middle of what she'd thought was a simple acknowledgement of terms was language binding her to 6 months of employment, with penalties for early termination, including forfeiture of all wages earned. "This is unconscionable," Jessamine said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's business. You signed it, which means you agreed to the terms. If you want to break the contract, you'll leave here with nothing but the clothes on your back." Webb smiled, showing those yellow teeth. "Or you can fulfill your obligation, and I'll pay you everything owed plus a bonus for your good work. You tricked me. I gave you the document to read. Not my fault if you didn't read it carefully." Webb stood, moving around the desk. "You're valuable to me, Miss Farrow. You're smart, efficient, and you've already organized my accounts better than anyone I've ever hired. I'm not inclined to let you go easily." Jessamine stood as well, clutching her hands together to stop them from shaking. "I'll consult with Mr. O'Sullivan about this." "You do that. But the contract is binding, and Judge Harrison will uphold it if you force this to court." Webb's expression softened slightly, became almost paternal. "Miss Farrow, I'm not your enemy. Work for me for 6 months as agreed, and then marry your rancher with my blessing and your wages in your pocket." "That's not so unreasonable." She left the office feeling sick, the joy of yesterday curdled into something bitter. 6 months. She'd have to tell Owen, have to postpone everything. Would he wait? Would he understand? That evening she sent word to Owen through one of the ranch hands who came into town for supplies. She couldn't face telling him in person, not yet. The note was brief. "Need to speak with you. Urgent. Please come tomorrow." Owen arrived at dawn, looking worried. They walked to Maggie's, which wasn't yet open, and sat on the bench outside. "What's wrong?" Owen asked, taking her hand. Jessamine explained about the contract, watching Owen's face darken with anger as she spoke. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I'll buy out your contract," he said finally. "Whatever the penalty is, I'll pay it." "Owen, no, that money should go to the ranch, to building your herd. Our ranch, our herd, and none of it matters if you're not there with me." Owen gripped her hands tighter. "Jessamine, I don't trust Webb. There's something wrong about this whole situation. I want you away from him as soon as possible. Let me try talking to him again. Maybe I can negotiate something." She lifted their joined hands to her cheek. "I don't want to start our marriage with you sacrificing so much." "You're not a sacrifice, you're everything." The simple statement made tears sting her eyes. She kissed his palm, then stood. "Give me a few days. Let me try to work this out." Owen stood too, pulling her into an embrace that felt like a fortress. "If he tries anything, if you feel unsafe for even a moment, you come find me. Promise." I promise." But the next few days brought no solutions. Webb was immovable, insisting she fulfill the contract. Jessamine threw herself into the work, trying to find something, anything, that might give her leverage. The accounts told a story of a man making significant money from various enterprises, but there was nothing obviously illegal or even unethical. Then, late one night while working on correspondence, Jessamine found it. A letter tucked into a ledger, nearly missed. It was from a mining company executive, thanking Webb for dealing with the land title problem and ensuring that a particular prospector had left town permanently. The tone was congratulatory, and the amount paid to Webb for this service was staggering. Jessamine read the letter 3 times, her heart pounding. The implication was clear. Webb had frightened or perhaps even hurt someone to secure mining rights for a company willing to pay handsomely for such services. It wasn't quite proof of anything illegal, but it painted Webb in a sinister light. She was still holding the letter when the office door opened. Webb stood there, and his eyes went immediately to the paper in her hands. "Working late, Miss Farrow." His voice was casual, but there was an edge to it. "Just finishing up some correspondence filing." Jessamine tried to keep her voice steady, tried to slide the letter back into the ledger naturally. Webb crossed the room in 3 strides and plucked the letter from her hands. He read it, his jaw working, then looked at her with eyes gone cold as a snake's. "You're a curious woman, Miss Farrow. Too curious for your own good." "I wasn't prying. It was just mixed in with the business letters. Nevertheless, you've seen something you shouldn't have." Webb moved to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a small pistol. He didn't point it at her, just laid it on the desk between them, a threat made tangible. "Now we have a problem." Terror flooded through Jessamine, cold and paralyzing. "Mr. Webb, I don't care about your business dealings. They're none of my concern." "That may be true, but I can't take the risk that you'll share what you've seen with your rancher or with the sheriff. Men have gone to prison for less." Webb sat down, the pistol within easy reach. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to continue working for me, not for 6 months, but for a year. You'll keep your mouth shut about everything you've seen or heard, and you'll tell Owen O'Sullivan that you've changed your mind about marrying him." "No." The word came out before Jessamine could stop it. "No." Webb picked up the pistol, examining it casually. "Miss Farrow, I don't think you understand your situation." "I understand perfectly. You're threatening me to keep your secrets and to give up the man I love, and I'm saying no." Jessamine stood, her legs shaking but her voice steady. "You can threaten me all you want, but I won't betray Owen. If you want to shoot me, go ahead, but my death will bring questions you don't want answered." For a long moment, Webb just stared at her. Then, incredibly, he laughed. "You've got steel in you, I'll give you that. Your rancher is a lucky man." He set down the pistol. "All right, Miss Farrow, let's negotiate. I'll release you from your contract on one condition." "What condition? You never speak of what you saw in that letter. Not to O'Sullivan, not to the sheriff, not to anyone. You take it to your grave." Jessamine hesitated. The prudent thing would be to agree to take her freedom and run. But that letter represented something dark, potentially dangerous. If Webb had hurt someone, shouldn't that be revealed? As if reading her thoughts, Webb said, "The prospector in that letter is alive and well, living in California with money in his pocket. I convinced him to sell his claim, that's all. A little intimidation, perhaps, but no real harm done. The rest of my business is legitimate, I swear it." That letter makes things sound worse than they are. "How do I know you're telling the truth? You don't. But you have my word for what that's worth." Webb stood. "Miss Farrow, I'm not a good man, but I'm not a monster either. I'm simply someone who sees opportunities and takes them, sometimes bending rules that I think are arbitrary. But I don't kill people and I don't hurt women. So here's my offer. Your silence in exchange for your freedom and all the wages you've earned, paid in full tomorrow. Take it or leave it." Jessamine weighed her options. She could refuse, could try to tell the sheriff about the letter, but it proved nothing on its own. Webb clearly had influence in town, and who would take her word over his? She could tell Owen, but what could he do except get himself in trouble trying to defend her honor? "I'll take it," she said finally. "But I want the contract destroyed, and I want my wages in cash before I leave this room." "Done." Webb pulled the contract from his desk and held it over the lamp flame, letting it burn to ash in the trash bin. Then he opened his safe and counted out bills, stacking them on the desk. 2 months' wages, as agreed, plus a bonus for your discretion. Jessamine counted the money, found it correct, and tucked it into her skirt pocket. "We're finished, then." "We're finished. But Miss Farrow, a word of advice, be careful. Nevada is full of men like me, and some of them are much worse. You're marrying a good man in O'Sullivan. Hold on to him." She left the office without another word, her heart hammering against her ribs. She went straight to her room, packed her few belongings, and left the Silver Dollar Saloon before anyone could stop her. The night was cool and dark, stars brilliant overhead, and Jessamine walked through the empty streets to Maggie's restaurant, where she knew there was a small boarding house attached. Maggie answered her knock in a nightgown and robe, took one look at Jessamine's face, and ushered her inside without questions. She set Jessamine up in a tiny but clean room, brought her tea, and sat while Jessamine cried from relief and residual fear. "You're safe now," Maggie said, patting her hand. "And tomorrow we'll send word to that young man of yours." In the morning, Maggie's husband rode out to the O'Sullivan ranch while Jessamine helped in the restaurant kitchen, needing something to do with her shaking hands. Owen arrived by mid-morning, bursting through the door looking frantic. "Jessamine." He saw her and crossed the space in seconds, pulling her into his arms. "Are you all right? What happened?" She told him everything, watching his expression cycle through anger and fear and relief. When she finished, Owen held her face in his hands. "We're getting married today," he said firmly. "Right now. Judge Harrison is in town, and I'm not waiting another minute to make you my wife. Owen, we need a license, we need to plan. We need nothing but each other and a judge. Everything else is just details." His thumb brushed her cheek. "Please, Jessamine, I can't stand the thought of you being here unprotected for another night." Looking into his eyes, seeing the fierce love there, Jessamine found herself nodding. "Yes, yes, let's get married today." They went to Judge Harrison's office, where the older man listened to their request with raised eyebrows but agreed to perform the ceremony. Charlie, Owen's foreman, was summoned from the general store to serve as witness, along with Maggie. They stood in the judge's small office, Jessamine still in her work dress and Owen in his everyday clothes, and spoke vows that bound them together as husband and wife. When the judge pronounced them married, and Owen kissed her, Jessamine felt the last piece of herself click into place. This was right. This was what she'd been searching for without knowing she was searching. They rode to the ranch that afternoon, Jessamine sitting in front of Owen on his horse, his arms around her keeping her safe. As they crested the hill and the ranch came into view, Owen said softly, "Welcome home, Mrs. O'Sullivan." Mrs. O'Sullivan. The name felt strange and wonderful. Jessamine leaned back against her husband, feeling his solid warmth, and smiled. The first weeks of marriage were an adjustment. Jessamine had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, how to manage a household in the middle of Nevada instead of a boarding room above a saloon. She learned to cook on the wood stove, to tend the chickens, to help with the garden. Owen was patient and kind, showing her how things worked, never making her feel inadequate when she struggled. The nights were both terrifying and wonderful. Owen was gentle with her, understanding her inexperience, taking his time to show her the pleasures of physical intimacy. Jessamine discovered she loved being held by him, loved the way he looked at her in the lamplight like she was beautiful, loved the feel of his skin against hers. More than that, she loved the conversations they had in the quiet darkness. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their hopes, their fears. Owen confessed his worry that he wasn't educated enough for her, that she'd grow bored of ranch life. Jessamine assured him that she'd never been happier, that all the books in Boston couldn't compare to building a real life with someone she loved. As autumn arrived, painting the hills in shades of gold and amber, Jessamine settled fully into her role as ranch wife. She took over the household accounts, applying her mathematical skills to tracking expenses and planning purchases. She learned to preserve vegetables from the garden, to make bread that didn't turn out like rocks, to mend shirts and darn socks. She also grew close to the ranch hands, especially Charlie, who treated her like a beloved niece. Charlie taught her to ride properly, and soon Jessamine was accompanying Owen on rides around the property, learning the boundaries and the best grazing areas. One evening in early October, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Owen said, "I need to tell you something." Jessamine looked at him, noting the serious tone. "What is it? Before you came along, I was thinking about selling the ranch. It was getting to be too much, managing everything alone. I was tired and lonely, and I couldn't see the point of building something if there was no one to share it with." He took her hand. "You gave me a reason to keep going. More than that, you gave me a reason to want to make this place better, bigger, something we can pass down to our children someday." "Owen," she kissed him softly, "you gave me a reason too, a reason to believe in the future again, to want things I thought were lost to me. We saved each other, I think. I love you, Jessamine O'Sullivan. I love you too." November brought the first snow, dusting the landscape white. Jessamine woke one morning feeling queasy, and the pattern continued for several days. It took her longer than it should have to realize what it meant, and when she finally did, she waited until she was certain before telling Owen. She chose a quiet evening after dinner. Owen was reading through a cattle catalog, and Jessamine sat beside him, her heart fluttering nervously. "Owen, I have something to tell you." He set down the catalog, giving her his full attention. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." For a moment, Owen just stared at her, then his face split into the biggest smile she'd ever seen. He let out a whoop of joy, picked her up, and spun her around before carefully setting her back down. Sorry, I shouldn't spin you around in your condition." He knelt beside her chair, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "A baby. We're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy, Jessamine, I'm beyond happy. I'm terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once." He looked up at her with shining eyes. "We're going to be parents." The winter passed slowly, with Jessamine growing steadily round her. Owen fussed over her constantly, barely letting her lift anything heavier than a teacup. Charlie and the other ranch hands were equally protective, treating her like delicate china. Jessamine found it both touching and exasperating, insisting she was pregnant, not dying. She wrote letters to Owen's sister in Denver, and they began a correspondence that grew into friendship. Sarah O'Sullivan seemed delighted that her brother had married, and she sent packages of baby clothes and advice. Spring arrived with wildflowers dotting the hills, and Jessamine felt like she was blooming too, despite the discomfort of her expanding body. She spent hours sitting on the porch, knitting baby clothes and dreaming of the child she'd soon hold. The baby came in late May, during a warm afternoon when the air smelled of sage. Maggie had come to stay with them for the birth, and her experienced hands guided Jessamine through the long hours of labor. Owen paced outside, stopping occasionally at the window to check on her until Maggie shooed him away. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and screaming, Maggie wrapped the infant and placed the bundle in Jessamine's arms. "A boy," she announced with satisfaction. Owen was allowed in then, and he approached the bed like he was entering a church. He looked down at his son, at his wife, and tears streamed unashamedly down his face. "He's perfect," Owen whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "Jessamine, he's absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Jessamine asked, exhausted but exhilarated. They discussed names for months without settling on anything. Now, looking at his son, Owen said, "Oliver. Oliver Samuel O'Sullivan, after both our fathers." "Oliver," Jessamine repeated, testing it. "Yes, that's right." "Hello, Oliver." The baby's arrival transformed the ranch. Charlie and the hands took over more duties so Owen could help with the baby, though Owen still worked dawn to dusk managing the property. Jessamine discovered a fierce, protective love she'd never imagined possible, along with an exhaustion that made her previous life seem restful by comparison. But even on the hardest days, when Oliver screamed for hours and she thought she might collapse from fatigue, Jessamine never regretted her choice. She'd look at Owen, at their son, at the life they were building together, and feel overwhelmed with gratitude. Oliver grew from a squalling infant into a chubby, happy baby who smiled at everyone. He had Owen's blue eyes and Jessamine's dark hair, and both parents were completely smitten. The ranch hands would take turns entertaining him, and Charlie could often be found making ridiculous faces to coax out Oliver's gurgling laugh. As Oliver approached his first birthday, Jessamine realized she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect, and she continued managing the household with Oliver on her hip. Their second son arrived in early winter, a calmer baby than Oliver had been. They named him James, and Owen joked that their family was complete. But fate had other plans. Over the next 7 years, Jessamine would bear 3 more children, a daughter they named Rose, who had her father's charm and her mother's mind for figures, then twin boys, Matthew and William, who kept everyone constantly busy. The ranch grew along with the family. Owen gradually expanded the herd and the property, buying adjacent land when it became available. They built an addition onto the house to accommodate their growing family, adding bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Charlie retired from active ranch work, but stayed on as an advisor and beloved pseudo-grandfather to the children. Jessamine learned to manage a household of 7 with the same efficiency she'd once applied to ledgers. She taught the children their letters and numbers, read to them from the books she ordered from San Francisco, instilled in them the value of hard work and kindness. Owen was a wonderful father, patient and loving, teaching the boys to ride and rope, and treating Rose with the same respect and expectations he gave her brothers. He'd often tell Jessamine that she'd made him the richest man in Nevada, not with gold or silver, but with the family they'd built together. On their 10th anniversary, Owen surprised Jessamine with a picnic on the hill overlooking the ranch. They sat on a blanket, watching their children play below, the ranch spreading out like a patchwork quilt. "You ever miss Boston?" Owen asked, passing her a piece of cake that Maggie had made for the occasion. Jessamine considered the question. "Sometimes I miss certain things. The libraries, the theater, but miss my old life. Never. I was existing there, just going through the motions. Here I'm alive. No regrets about answering that advertisement then. My only regret is that I wasted 22 years not knowing you." She leaned against his shoulder. though I suppose we both needed those years to become the people who were ready for each other. Owen wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. I still remember the first moment I saw you, standing outside that saloon looking lost and determined at the same time. I thought you were the most interesting person I'd ever seen. And you looked at me like I was the only woman alive, like I mattered. No one had ever looked at me that way before. You did matter. You do matter. You're everything, Jessamine. They kissed, long and sweet, and below them, their children's laughter echoed across the valley. This was what happiness looked like, Jessamine thought. Not the absence of difficulty, because ranch life was full of challenges, but the presence of love and purpose and belonging. The years continued to pass, marked by seasons and birthdays, by cattle drives and harsh winters, by the small joys and sorrows that made up any life. Oliver grew into a serious young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. James developed a love for books and wanted to become a teacher. Rose showed a talent for training horses, and the twins were inseparable troublemakers who kept everyone laughing. When Jessamine turned 40, she looked in the mirror and saw a woman transformed from that frightened girl who'd arrived in Goldfield 17 years earlier. Her face was more lined, her figure had softened from bearing children, but her eyes held contentment. She'd found what she'd been seeking without knowing she sought it, a place to belong, work that mattered, and love that sustained. That evening, Owen found her on the porch, which had become her favorite spot to think. "What's on your mind?" he asked, settling beside her on the bench he'd built years ago. "I was thinking about the advertisement that brought me here. Wanted, bookkeeper, neat penmanship required. 8 words that changed my entire life. Best hiring decision Marcus Webb ever made, even if he didn't get to keep you. Have you heard anything about him recently?" Jessamine hadn't thought about Webb in years, but suddenly she was curious. "Last I heard, he sold his interests in Goldfield and moved to California, made a fortune in San Francisco real estate, or so the rumors say." Owen took her hand. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd stayed working for him?" "No, because I can't imagine any version of my life that doesn't have you and the children in it. That path led to this one, and this is where I was meant to be. I love you, Jessamine O'Sullivan, more today than yesterday, though I wouldn't have thought that possible. I love you too." As the sun set over the Nevada hills, painting everything golden, Jessamine reflected on how strange and wonderful life could be. She'd thought she was accepting just a job when she'd come west, a means of survival and nothing more. Instead, she'd found her destiny. The years continued their march, bringing changes and challenges. Oliver married a sweet girl from town and started working full-time on the ranch. James went to college in California, became a teacher, and returned to Goldfield to educate the next generation. Rose met a horse trainer and fell in love, getting married in a ceremony on the ranch that reminded Jessamine of her own hasty wedding. Matthew and William eventually separated, with Matthew taking over a section of the ranch and William becoming a deputy sheriff. Through it all, Owen and Jessamine remained the steady center, their love deepening with each passing year. They grew older together, their hair turning gray, their steps slowing, but the connection between them only strengthened. On their 30th anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch. All 5 children came, bringing spouses and the growing collection of grandchildren. The house was full of noise and laughter, and Jessamine spent the day cooking and visiting, surrounded by the family she and Owen had created. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed or departed, Owen and Jessamine sat on their porch once more. It was their place, where they'd shared countless conversations over 3 decades. 30 years, Owen said wonderingly. Feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean. Jessamine leaned her head on his shoulder, still fitting perfectly against him after all these years. Thank you for pulling me into that saloon, Owen laughed. Thank you for being worth pulling in. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the chirp of crickets. The same stars that had watched them fall in love still shone overhead, constants in a changing world. You remember what you said to me at Maggie's restaurant all those years ago? Jessamine asked. That you felt like you'd been waiting for me without knowing you were waiting. I remember. I understood what you meant, but I didn't fully appreciate it then. I do now. We were two pieces that found each other, clicked into place, and made something whole. Owen kissed the top of her head. The best thing I ever did was look at you like you were the only woman alive. You still do, you know. After 30 years, 5 children, and more difficulties than we can count, you still look at me that way. Because you still are the only woman alive, at least for me. You always will be. Jessamine lifted her face to his, and they kissed with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion that had never quite faded. This was love, she thought. Not just the lightning strike of initial attraction, but the steady flame that burned through decades, warming everything it touched. When they were 50 years into their marriage, Owen's health began to fail. Nothing dramatic, just the slow diminishment of a body well used and well worn. He couldn't ride as long or work as hard, but he remained the same man Jessamine had fallen in love with, steady and kind and utterly devoted to his family. They spent more time on the porch, watching their grandchildren run through the same fields where their children had played. Owen would tell stories about the early days of the ranch, and Jessamine would add her own memories, the two of them weaving together the tapestry of their shared life. One evening in late summer, as they sat watching the sunset, Owen took Jessamine's hand. I need you to know something, he said quietly. What? That if I could live my life over again, I wouldn't change a single thing. Every choice I made, every path I took led me to you and to this life. That's all I could ever want. Owen. Jessamine felt tears prick her eyes. I mean it. We've had a good life, Jessamine. A really good life. And it's been good because I got to share it with you. They sat together as the sun disappeared behind the hills, holding hands held by love exactly where they were meant to be. And when, a few years later, Owen passed peacefully in his sleep, Jessamine took comfort in knowing they'd had more happiness than most people ever dreamed of. She lived another 5 years after Owen's death, remaining on the ranch surrounded by family. Her children and grandchildren visited constantly, filling the house with life and noise. She told stories about Owen, about their courtship, about building the ranch together, ensuring that future generations would know the love story at the foundation of their family. On a spring morning, Jessamine woke early and went to sit on the porch. The sun was just rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. She could almost feel Owen beside her, his presence so strong after all their years together. I'm coming, love, she whispered. I'll see you soon. She closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face, and drifted peacefully away. The family buried her beside Owen, on the hill overlooking the ranch they'd built together. Rose planted wildflowers around the graves, the same wildflowers that had bloomed the spring Oliver was born. The headstones stood side by side, reading simply, Owen O'Sullivan, beloved husband and father, and Jessamine O'Sullivan, beloved wife and mother. But the real monument to their love wasn't stone or flowers. It was the ranch that still operated, passed down through generations. It was the family that gathered every year to celebrate their anniversary and tell stories. It was the love that had started with a gunshot and a blue-eyed rancher who looked at a frightened girl like she was precious. Years later, One of Jessamine's great-granddaughters would find an old trunk in the attic of the ranch house. Inside were letters, photographs, and a small journal where Jessamine had recorded her memories. The great-granddaughter read about a young woman who traveled west for a job and found everything she'd never known she needed. The journal's final entry was written just weeks before Jessamine's death. It read, "I thought I was accepting employment when I came to Nevada. I thought my life would be numbers and ledgers and quiet solitude, but fate had other plans. Owen looked at me like I was the only woman alive, and in doing so, he made me feel alive for the first time. We built a life together from nothing but love and determination. If I could speak to my younger self, standing nervously outside that saloon, I'd tell her not to be afraid. I'd tell her that everything she's endured has led to this moment, and that the best parts of her life are just beginning. I'd tell her that love, real love, is worth every risk, every fear, every leap into the unknown. And I'd tell her that sometimes the job you thought you were taking is really the journey to your destiny." The great-granddaughter closed the journal, tears streaming down her face, and looked out the window at the ranch spreading out below. The same hills, the same sky, the same spirit of love and perseverance that had started it all. She made a promise then to preserve these memories, to tell this story, to ensure that no one forgot the bookkeeper from Boston and the cowboy who'd pulled her into a saloon and into a life beyond her wildest dreams. Because some love stories were too beautiful to forget, too powerful to fade, too true to remain silent. And the love between Jessamine and Owen O'Sullivan was exactly that kind of story, enduring, transformative, and eternal as the Nevada sky under which they'd built their life together.